Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Babayan, and I'm the director of the Armenian Studies program. It's wonderful to see both familiar faces and also new faces, thanks to our Manugian postdoc, Alina Poghosyan, who will be speaking today, who's drawing in the Slavic studies crowd. And so welcome, and despite the fact that I know a lot of you are heading to Philadelphia for your annual association, I'm really happy to see you here. I would like to start off by thanking our co-sponsors, CREASE, the Center for Eastern European Studies, as well as the Department of Slavics for co-sponsoring this lecture by Alina Poghosyan. Alina Poghosyan received her PhD in social anthropology from the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography at the National Academy of Sciences in Yerevan. Her dissertation focuses on the everyday lives of Armenian labor migrants returning from Russia. The statistics she brings forth to underline the significance of her study are revealing. 90% of all labor migrants leave Armenia for Russia, and 36% of households in Armenia are implicated in this pattern of migration. Alina explores the effects of migration on the lives of Armenians and on public discourses circulating in Armenia. It's important to signal that migration has not been studied in order to appreciate its cultural, political, and economic effects on the processes of post-Soviet transitions. These are two critical interventions Alina's dissertation and current work engages with at this historic junction where migration is so poignantly at the forefront of today's humanitarian ethics and politics. Drawing on a rich collection of interviews with migrants during her fieldwork, Alina teases out discourses that are being shaped by the experiences of labor migrants who work and live in Russia or who have strong ties with relatives living there. These discourses highlight the multifaceted influence of Russia in the region and the political orientation of Armenian migrants towards Russia. Alina Poghosyan has received multiple grants and fellowships, to cite a couple from the Swiss Forum for Migration and Population Studies at the University of Neuchâtel and the Academic Swiss Caucasus Network at the University of Fribourg. She has also published widely in Armenian and in Russian, and I hear very soon in English. She'll be talking to us today about her new research that deals with Armenian migration and its effects on post-Soviet transition processes in the South Caucasus. Please join me in welcoming Alina Poghosyan.
Thank you, Catherine, very much for reminding me of my biography, because some points I already forgot, but it is very nice that, about my participation in different programs. Yeah, it was. Thank you. Now to get used to this technique. Okay. In March 2013, I was doing ethnography in Kaps, a village of seasonal labor migrants in Armenia. During the research, I lived in Muradyan's family. The father and the son of the Muradyans were Khopanchis, a traditional name for seasonal labor migrants. Since it was March, the time when the most Khopanchis leave for work in Russia, I had opportunity to witness the family's preparation for Armen's and his father's departure. Armen's mother tried to help the man in packing the bags, and from time to time her assistance led to a quarrel. She kept putting food into the bags, while Armen was inclined to take the most important things to avoid paying for overweight. Armen's mother put cheese made by her into the bag. Armen took it out. Then she cut it to make the piece smaller and put it back into the bag. Armen started complaining. She tried to convince to take a very small piece until he finally gave up and took some. They had almost the same fight every year when Armen and his father was about to leave for Russia. The tradition of Hopan was established in Armenia during the Soviet period. Current migration processes are very much related to that period. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many migratory patterns and processes were changed. Today, I would like to discuss the main migration processes in the countries of the South Caucasus, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. I decided to present not only the current situation, but go back to 90s and delineate the principal changes in migration patterns. I hope that the dynamic picture will provide more multi-aspect and comprehensive description of migration in post-Soviet South Caucasus. I suggest breaking the post-Soviet migration history into three main periods, each of which has its peculiarities in terms of migration causes and goals, migrants' characteristics and destination, and other aspects. So here you see these three periods and approximate time that divide the whole period into three parts. So let's start from the first period. It is the end of 80s and second half of 90s. The new big wave of emigration from the Soviet South Caucasus started in the last years of the Soviet period. Civic movements, ethnic conflicts, wars, economic crises, all of these things accompanied collapse of Soviet Union. All these events entailed active movement of population in the whole territory of the former Soviet Union. They resulted in huge number of refugees, internally displaced people, economic migrants, and repatriates. Oh, what did I do, Naira? Okay, yeah, it's not very difficult. So the first period, you see the time and you see the main reasons and you see the main migrant groups. This is refugees, internally displaced people, families, and diasporas. We will come later to that. These events stimulated migration both within and out of former Soviet Union. South Caucasus did not elude any of the mentioned events. Nagorno-Karabakh War, Georgian Ossetian and Georgian Abkhazian conflicts, economic crisis, shortage of food and fuel made many people flee from their countries to Russia and Western states. Russia was the host country for migrants from all the former Soviet countries. It pulled both ethnic Russians and the titular nations. I call this period of migration fleeing, since the chief reason of migration during the period was the threat of physical security in the South Caucasus countries. Using the classical terms of migration studies, one can describe that period as migration conditioned mainly by push rather than pull factors. This means that there were more factors pushing migrants from their countries of origins rather than factors attracting people to the host countries. That period can also be characterized as a predominantly forced, long-term and permanent migration of entire families. That was a period of irregular and illegal migration. The early beginning of 90s was also a period of migration of diasporas. During those years, the ethnic map of the post-Soviet territory changed crucially. After the collapse, the titular population in all the countries but Russia increased dramatically. Russia was the only exception. Together with ethnic Russians, Russia received a large number of immigrants of other nationalities. As I mentioned before, some ethnic minorities had to migrate because of ethnic conflicts. Other ethnic minorities, like Germans, Greeks, Jews, and others found possibilities to leave their titular homelands. Some EU countries launched repatriation programs to admit their compatriots from the former and collapsed Soviet countries. The representatives of ethnic minorities re-established their ethnic identities on documents in order to be able to take part in those repatriation programs. In Armenia, many Armenians also treated those programs as opportunities to leave for Europe. Anthropological studies have revealed two particularly notable cases describing the phenomenon. Nearly 50 people in a Garni village and nearly 80 people in a Tallinn village left for Germany as a German offspring's family. Through registering divorces and marriages, they recreated their family ties the way to be documented as offsprings of an old woman with German origin. So in these both cases, 50 people in one case and 80 people in another case, they were just recreated their ties fictitiously to be somehow connected with these old German ladies. The fictitious family ties with the German old woman made all those people eligible for the German repatriation program, helped leaving for Germany, and applied to citizenship. The field material provides many evidences of documentation frauds and other illegal practices. I'm mentioning these evidences to demonstrate not only the illegal practices, but also the zeal of emigration, readiness to rescue ventures, and high demand of any mechanism of emigration organization. All the countries of the South Caucasus started their independence with intense migration, immigration of refugees, internally displaced people, and emigration of titular population and ethnic minorities. The post-Soviet migration of that period is hardly fitted into migration theory's framework. The most influential migration theories, economic theories, argue that the leading drive of migration is the difference in the wages between the countries, as well as the shortcoming of cheap labor in one and the surplus in the other labor market. Nevertheless, migration patterns in South Caucasus during the fleeing period cannot be explained by the economic theories. The economic factors played little role in terms of both migration causes and destinations. Migration to Russia can be explained in frames of social and cultural capital theories. Non-visa migration regime, shared language and culture, as well as relatives and friend ties with Russia decreased the cost of migration to Russia and made it attractive destination. The factors affecting migration from South Caucasus to Western countries require another theoretical conceptualization. In the migration theories, I have not come across to active discussion referring the image of destination country as a pull factor. In the frame of this paper, I cannot concentrate on that issue, though this is very interesting me now. Nevertheless, I want to mention as a hypothetical assumption that the Iron Curtains restricting communication with Western countries and Soviet anti-Western propaganda contributed to construction of desirable image of Western countries significantly, and that affected post-Soviet migration to those countries. So this was the main description of the first period of migration, which I called fleeing. Now let's see what happened in the end of 90s. I want to return to the Armen story I started with. His father first left for work in Russia in the end of 90s. By that time, the situation in the countries of the South Caucasus changed. The ethnic conflicts froze and the economic crisis was more or less overcome. All the countries recorded economic growth. These developments induced changes in migration practices too. Work became the main motivation for migration. Unemployment, low salaries, and shortage of professional work became main push factors of emigration, in contrast to the ethnic conflicts and shortage of food and fuel in the previous period. Labor migrants became the leading migration pattern. Labor migration became the leading migration pattern instead of the forced migration of the previous period, and labor migrants became the main migrant stock in contrast to the refugees and IDPs of the fleeing period. And during the second period, the factors leading to migration shifted from push to pull factors. So if during the first period people mostly were pushed from their home countries, now they are getting attractive with pull factors in other countries. And among these other countries, Russia is still the dominating destination. So Russia continued to be the most attractive destination for labor migrants. By the end of 90s and early 20s, Moscow received many foreign and domestic investments, which increased economic opportunities and pulled much migrant labor. The statistical data on migration of that period is not very accurate, and so some issues are about some issues it is even very contradicting. Nevertheless, it allows drawing out some main trends. Thus, that period was predominantly male migration, but the rate of female migrants was much higher in Georgia. In case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, women mostly accompanied their husbands and sons to the destination countries, while most female migrants from Georgia were labor migrants themselves. The feminization of migration in Georgia has been continuing steadily. Studies of late periods record higher percent of female labor migrants from Georgia. The gender specifics prescribe another characteristic of migration in the South Caucasus. The migrants from Armenia and Azerbaijan are mostly involved in the construction and trade in Russia, while Georgia had higher involvement of emigrants in the domestic work industry in EU countries. Armen is a typical representative of labor migrants, a middle-aged man with secondary education from out of capital settlement. Like other seasonal labor migrants, he left his village for Russia in February-March every year and returned back in nearly 8 months. Both Armen and his father were breadwinning heads of the families. They left for Russia to earn for their family needs. So as many labor migrants, they lived quite humble life in Russia. On the one hand, they aimed at saving money and did not spend a lot on leisure activities. On the other hand, they left their workplace very rarely in order to avoid police and migration service representatives. For this period of emigration, economic factors are more ponderable. Nevertheless, they were not the sole reasons for migration. Armen's friend told that years ago they used to live for Russia together. For the first time, they left when they newly returned from army, and this is very typical. The both were very interested in the journey to Russia. They had heard of the life there a lot. Many men used to leave the village for Russia, and particularly the young men kept telling stories about the lifestyle there. Storytelling is one of the important aspects of any journey. Young single men, in comparison with breadwinner fathers, have less responsibilities toward the families and more interest in wider range of experiencing. So their storytelling involves tales of adventures, new experiences, women of the other world, etc. Storytelling is one of the factors contributing to the migration perpetuation, and the storing of young men contribute to non-economic motivation of emigration. new experience, more freedom they may have in the big city, urban lifestyle, and other factors make migration attractive, not only and not as much in terms of economic possibilities, but also in terms of new everyday life. At the moment of the study, Armen's friend had 5 years ban on entering Russia because he was recently deported. He worked and earned in village, and he earned for the village he earned enough. Not bad. Nevertheless, he anticipated the outcome of that ban to leave for Russia again. Here I want to invite attention to a particular aspect. Movement of people from between countries is the most discussed migration pattern. Nevertheless, it is worth to mention that in cases of Armenia and Azerbaijan, migrants leave villages and small towns for big cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. So migration is not only movement from one country to another, but it is a movement from rural culture and social space into more diverse urban space that offers unique time and space organization, anonymousness, more opportunities for diverse cultural and social activities. To summarize this period, I would stress once again that the second period of migration in the post-Soviet Caucasus is mostly labor migration. The patterns and main trends of labor migration of that period are vivid up to now. Many men in Armenia and Azerbaijan have been living for work in Russia while their wives and families stay at home. In Georgia, women have been more involved in labor migration. The economic factors influenced emigration of that period. Economic situation was not the only condition of migration. Slow urbanization and modernization of the peripheral parts of the countries also instigate migration crucially. I'm approaching to the third period, which is actually the current situation now in South Caucasus. Currently, the South Caucasus is a migration-sending region. Armenia and Georgia are the main sources of emigration. With some ups and downs, Azerbaijan has had positive migration rates since the beginning of 2000s. Here on this diagram, I want to show you, you can see it, that the net migration in Georgia and Armenia, this is green and blue lines, are negative, while in Azerbaijan it is positive or at least zero. But I want to be sure that you know what net migration means. Net migration is out-migration, emigration, minus immigration. So if more people leave their home countries than people that come to that country, the net migration is minus. And the opposite, if more people come to that country rather than leave that country, the migration is positive. Net migration is positive. So more about Azerbaijan to understand why the trend is different and not like in Georgia and Armenia. Azerbaijan differs from Armenia and Georgia with higher rate of immigration. The development of oil and gas industries make Azerbaijan attractive for foreign workers. While initially the oil industry attracted foreign high-skilled specialists, currently the country pulls low-skilled workers too. Thus, the high rate of immigration is the factor contributing to the positive net migration of Azerbaijan under the conditions of still high emigration rate. So this chart shows that in Azerbaijan the emigration is not little, but just because of they have also immigration, people coming to Azerbaijan, that is why the difference and the net migration is close to zero. As the chart demonstrates, Georgia has the biggest stock of net migration. Nevertheless, the picture is changed when the number of net migration is compared with the populations of the countries. In these terms, Armenia has the highest rate of emigration in the South Caucasus. As of 2015, net migration in the countries of the South Caucasus is 0 in Azerbaijan per 1,000 people, minus 2.7 in Georgia, and minus 5 and 8.8 in Armenia. In retrospective view, since 90s, Georgia has had the highest rate of emigration. You can see that in this table. During those periods, since 90s up till now, Georgia lost the where is it? Here. Georgia, Georgia had the biggest net migration, so it lost the most population through emigration, but the population growth is higher in Armenia, so higher in negative term. This means that despite many people in Georgia leave Georgia, nevertheless the population decrease is bigger in Armenia. This is because the natural growth of population is less in Armenia, less birth and more deaths in Armenia in comparison with Georgia. I'm talking a bit complicated maybe, but no? Yeah, so in the third period, Russia continues being the most popular destination for emigration from the South Caucasus. Still, Russia continues being in tops. Nevertheless, during this period, it has been losing its attractiveness for Georgian migrants, and it lost steadily. During 2002 till 2008, emigration to Russia has decreased with nearly 24%, which is really very big. High percentage. Now Georgian migrants target US and EU more. On the one hand, Georgian-Russian conflicts and broken diplomatic relations shrank opportunity for Georgians to stay and work in Russia. And on the other hand, Georgian migrants' interests in Western countries is connected with Georgia's political and cultural orientation towards EU and US. This is another table that demonstrates actually what I told. Here you see how big the percentage of Armenian migrants in Russia is. 90.6% of all migrants live for Russia, while only 3.2% of migrants live from EU countries. Azerbaijan have almost the same situation, and in Georgia the picture is totally different. And this I managed to find only the numbers from 2008, but I'm sure that if now a household survey is done, or any statistics is gathered in Georgia, this change is even more radical. In Armenia and Georgia, migration contributes to welfare of many families and in the whole overall economics of the countries. Remittances to Armenia and Georgia are comparable to 19.8% and 12.5% of GDPs correspondingly. And this is really very huge number. Imagine that almost 20% the remittances are comparable with almost 20%, 1/5 of the whole country's GDP. And Russia is the main remittance source for the countries. The remittances sent to Armenia and Georgia from Russia are comparable to 12.7 and 7.4% of GDPs correspondingly. The influential size of remittances shows how the emigration to Russia is important for the country's economies. It also hints at migration to be a lever for Russia's influence on the countries. So these are main characteristics of the third period. Main characteristics of the previous period are inherent to the current migration processes. And as I mentioned before, labor migration continues being leading migration process. Nevertheless, there are new developments too. Migration of middle class and return are new migration patterns that become more and more visible. A number of factors stimulate emigration of middle class, which has been formed in the South Caucasian countries newly. Recruitment of high-skilled specialists implemented by various immigration countries increased competitiveness of the specialists in the world labor market. Incentives of work in developed countries serve as significant factors instigating emigration of high-skilled specialists from middle class. These people leave not because of little payment or poor economic situation, but seeking social justice and other civil values, trusting the future, better conditions for sustainable career, and other human development perspectives. It is worth to mention that this migration pattern is not just a brain drain, but also an outflow of large economic, cultural, and social capital. This is very important because during the discussions, mostly this migration referred as being brain drain. But with emigration of these families, we don't lose only their brain, but it is also the most active segment of the population that has its own side to the rights, to the civil society, to the democracy, and this is the more rebellious and more claiming segment of society. The second return is another new migration trend in the South Caucasus. So little in comparison with emigration, nevertheless, all the countries have registered some rate of return migration. In many cases, it is either in retirement or failure return. Anthropological materials demonstrate that some people are inclined to return to the origin countries after their retirement. And this is many old people, when they retire, they prefer to go back to the countries they consider to be their home countries and spend their elder years there. Return of many families conditioned by failure of settling in the host countries. So failure and retirement returns are the most popular ones. These cases of failed returnees are mainly driven by migration policy in EU countries. In the second half of 20s, EU countries restricted their migration policy crucially. Many EU countries launched programs making migrants return to their origin countries and provide some grants for their reintegration. So many families are often made to leave the receiving countries, so-called voluntarily under compulsory. This means that they are to be deported in case they do not return voluntarily. All the countries of South Caucasus signed readmission agreements pledging to admit the returning compatriots. Now I'm already coming to concluding remarks. I presented the big picture of migration processes in the South Caucasus in the post-Soviet period. I claim that those processes are the part of post-Soviet transition. They are tightly linked to the Soviet past of the region and its further reconsideration. On the one hand, many migration patterns originate from the Soviet area. Many migratory routes were beaten and many ties were established in that period. On the other hand, current migration processes are very much linked to the reassessment of the Soviet time and Russia's imperialistic intentions. Current migration processes detect the extent the countries have overcome Russia's Soviet and post-Soviet imperialistic intentions. Migration is one of the tools Russia used for reasserting its influence in the post-Soviet space. As I mentioned previously, emigration to Russia and the remittances received from Russia are very significant for many families in Armenia and Georgia and for the whole economies of the countries. This circumstance provides Russia with additional lever of influence on the countries. Examples of using migration as a lever of pressure are various: deportation of immigrants, adoption of laws limiting certain works for migrants, ignorance towards growing xenophobia and hateful treatment of migrants, using migrants as economic negotiation tips, etc. For example, in 2006, Russia deported large number of Georgian migrants as a reaction to the Russian-Georgian relations crisis. In 2007, it adopted a law restricting foreigners' right to trade in Russian markets, and law affected immigrants from Russia significantly, since most of them were involved in trade. In 2015, the transfer of an Armenian migrant prosecuted in Russia was used as a tip in Russian-Armenian negotiation over the price of electricity sold by Russia to Armenia. Migration processes are not only affected by Russia's politics and actions, it is also influenced by and reflects attitudes toward Russia, relations with Russia, and reconsideration of Soviet past. I want to bring some example of this reconsideration and the difference of that reconsideration story between Armenia and Georgia. Here you see the poster which announced the exhibition of Soviet occupation. This is Soviet occupation. They have now Soviet occupation museum. This means that during recent years, Georgia started considering the Soviet period as an occupation. Their textbooks, historian textbooks, and other tools making the discourse now present that years as an occupation by Russia, occupation of Georgia by Russia. When in Armenia, the situation is absolutely different. Armenia does not consider that years to be occupation, and it is very, it even links many historical things with Russia. Here, this picture is done this year, and this is in the second biggest city of Armenia, Gyumri. This is the celebration of victory victory in Second World War. And as you see from the symbols, it is very much connected with Russia and even with the Soviet past. Here, sorry, I'm getting used to these techniques, very difficult. Yeah, here you don't see, maybe, but it is written SSSR and Pobeda, and all these posters here on background, they have very Soviet style, and this is really a recall of Soviet time, something that is absolutely new trend in Armenia. After the independence, in the early years of independence, we connected more this historical event, this victory with Armenian other pre-Soviet and after Soviet victories with. And now the trend is changed again, linking very much with Russia. This is the picture from this Soviet occupation museum in Georgia, where they present that years as a story of exiles, of terror, and other they describe and show this period in the negative signs. Here in Armenia, again, we are returning back, and this is again a recently made picture. This is, as you may recognize, this is a red scarf is again recalling symbols from Soviet period, and this is a teacher that maybe, probably they are organizing some event which was popular in Soviet. I guess this is for Labor's Day. And another picture from Armenia, this is also very recent. You see students visiting National Assembly, and they wear Soviet uniforms, Soviet student uniform. So, Georgia assessed the Soviet years as Soviet occupation. Especially after the Rose Revolution in 2003, Georgia turned its political course towards EU and US. Migration ties and trends reflected that changes too. Armenia, in contrast, recalls and appeals to the Soviet practices more and more often. And it strengthens economic, political, and cultural ties with Russia. Years ago, during his visit to Armenia, Russian President Putin doubted about who is de facto president of Armenians, he or Robert Kocharyan. He were implying to the large number of Armenians living and working in Russia, and his claim of authority was not just rhetorical. Armen, whose story is partly familiar to us, the most of the men in his village, who live for work in Russia every year, their families that depend on the remittances from Russia, the rest of Armenian population who have family members and relatives working and living in Russia, all of them have rather high loyalty towards Russia. On the one hand, it is conditioned by the fact that labor migrants spend the most time of the year in the countries and their families rely on their safe and successful work. On the other hand, the loyalty toward Russia is conditioned by Soviet nostalgia. This is what I wanted to tell you. And thank you so much for listening and coming. I talked a lot.
No.
No? I'm open to your questions.
So who would like to start us off?
Thank you very much for your very good presentation. I had a comment and perhaps a few questions. One is you gave the impression perhaps when you talked that some of these migrants were deported back out of Russia. Does that mean that that it's illegal for these people to go to Russia to work? Do they have to kind of sneak into the country, or can they legally go into the country? So that was a question I had. I think your point about the net reduction in population in Armenia compared to Georgia probably reflects the fact that in Armenia the population is much older and there's not as many young people, and therefore the birth rate and all of those things are much less than that. And the other thing I wonder if you might comment about is the influx of migrants, or so-called migrants or refugees from Syria, Armenians from Syria, because now in Armenia there are large populations of Syrians who've come into the country. I don't really know how many they are, but I think it's quite significant. Does that have an impact now on the country? So thank you for answering those questions.
Yeah. So first question is about illegal migration or irregular migration. We don't have, Armenia doesn't have a visa regime, so it is non-visa regime. So most immigration crises and border crossing are absolutely legal. But there is, Russia has this system of registration and work permit and special quotas for work permit, and this make the things for labor migrants very difficult. And since they don't have this rule of law and the informal practices are very widely spread, labor migrants generally find some ways to elude of this. So their arrival to Russia is legal, but very often their stay there and work there is not legal. And they, with this registration form that they generally use, they have they can stay there 3 months, or now it is 6 months, but seasonal labor, seasonal work in Russia more than 6 months. It is generally 8 or 9 months. So the rest of their stay, they stay there illegally. And about work permit, Russia changed its policy very fast, It is very difficult even to follow what happens, and Russia tries to make it more convenient. But again, it is not. It does not help to get rid of illegal and work in black market. So this difficulty with quota, the policy requires to stay on the same place where you are registered, while migrants are more movable. If they don't find the work there where they registered, they have to try to find work in another place, which they have limitation to do. So my answer is that leaving for Russia and crossing the border is almost in 100% it is legal, and first period of staying there is also legal. But end of their stay and work is in more cases it is illegal. And the second question about the Syrian Armenians from Syria, yes, we have very big number of immigrants from there. It is difficult to say some number. 80,000 are mentioned, but for many people this is a transitional country. Anyway, even if in the space of the city you can very obviously see their presence, because many people from Syria, they already have shops or small restaurants, and they are very visible now. So this, I think, this was right. The main thing you were interested. I can also add that this is it makes difficult in terms of statistic and many other things that these people that mostly are refugees by their social background and their story of immigration, they anyway cannot use their status of refugees because. Officially, they are not refugees because they had dual citizenship, and they are citizens of Armenia, while by their social background and their history, they are refugees. They are people that fled from from Syria. Sorry.
A couple of questions. One concerns the different attitudes toward the outside world of Georgians and Armenians, and isn't one large factor in that geopolitical, that for Georgia, Russia is the one nation that really threatens them, and this is not imaginary. as recent history shows. Whereas for Armenia, Russia is the one nation that perhaps can protect them in a very dangerous nation where the threats do not come from Russia, they come from other neighbors. And then the second question would be, in one of your tables, I think it mentioned Georgia as something of a destination for Armenians, and Tbilisi certainly historically has been a major destination. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit more.
Mm-hmm. So the first question is about Russia's role. I generally talk about the perception because really it is very difficult to assess really whether Russia is protection for Armenia or no, and whether it is threat for Georgia or no. Actually, the main discourse in Armenia, both everyday discourse, non-formal discourse, and governmental discourse, it says, yes, Russia is the only protector of Armenia. But I used to think about this kind of things as a construction and as a more discursive thing. While in case of Georgia, during the first period of independence, they have one story. Their textbooks taught one story, and that generation used to think that Russia has this picture. While after the Saakashvili, the history changed, the perception of the country changed, the perception of history changed. So maybe political scientists would give you more like objective vision, who is enemy to whom and who is friend to whom. But I'm used to think about this kind of these issues as just discursive things. And discourse is very changeable. Even during these 15 years of from 90s to 25 years. Even during these 25 years, you see how the perception of history is changed, and it is rewritten. It is rewritten. Yeah, this is my answer, and yeah. And the second question was about migration between these two countries. Actually, it is very common thing. Neighboring countries, if they are not in conflicts, they have very intense migrational migrant movements. And there is both migration from Georgia to Armenia and from Armenia to Georgia. Many Armenians see Georgia as a place to extend their businesses. There are different franchise of Armenian organizations there, and there are also relative ties. There are trade ties. So and Georgia is the one state that is close and open with Armenia, because in half of the neighbors, Armenia have close borders. So it is very common and natural thing that there are this migration. There are family marriages between Armenians and Georgians, and this also make migration. There are Armenian community living not only in Tbilisi but also in southern regions of Georgia.
Thank you for that great talk. I was particularly interested when you said that storytelling contributes towards non-economic motivations to leave Armenia. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that. What did these stories look like? Are they anecdotal, or do they take the form of poetry or song or something you'd see on TV? And second, do we see a sort of counter discourse that aims to encourage people to stay home, that talks about how it's hard to go abroad?
Yes, I will start for a last question because it's very interesting and it is very much discussed, and you will find many social announcements, social rollicks encouraging people not to leave but stay. And sometimes they are very sentimental, sometimes they are not reliable, but they promote there are much money are spent on these kind of things to convince people not to leave. And since the money are most from EU, especially people are try to be convinced not to go to EU countries. And you will find different kinds of announcing, dissemination of information and convincing. Video rollicks in various styles that show how illegal life can be difficult there, how it is difficult to receive asylum seeker status in the EU, because this is very widely spread belief, myth that you can just go abroad and ask for asylum and get and be provided with this asylum seeker status. So yes, there are this idea of convincing people to stay, and there is also very manipulated idea that many political parties are applied to that in their programs and in their talks, that they are going to reduce emigration for Armenia. This is very hot topic and it manipulated a lot. So this is about your last question. I hope I answered to it, right?
What do the stories look like?
Oh yes, this is the first topic. These stories, they are created in different ways, in everyday talks, in kitchens and other places. And there are also poetic things as well, there are songs and small like folk poems about that. Just now one came to my mind, a song that keep a man sing to the wife and say, keep my shoes, because maybe I will not come, or maybe I will come. Maybe I will bring Volga, which is a Soviet car, or maybe instead of bringing Volga, I will bring Olga. I will marry a Russian woman. Yes, and all these stories, you will find them in poetry and in anecdotes. There are many anecdotes and jokes about Russians, about migrants in Russia and these relations. Yeah.
Is the migration that's driven by jobs, the seasonal migration? You mentioned construction as being one area that is big. That sounds seasonal, like you can't do it in the dead of winter. What are some of the other jobs? And I wondered, are there differences between the kinds of jobs Armenians are getting in Russia? They seem to be, from what you said, the majority of this kind of migration to what, for example, Azeris or the smaller number of Georgians would be involved in.
Yeah. Migration is very much connected with networks, social networks. And if some social network established in some sphere, it perpetuates emigration and migration to that field. So Armenians in Russia mostly involved in construction, and there are even cases when Armenians have some promotion or success. They become brigadiers. People that create these small groups of migrants and invite them or bring them to Russia, work on construction. Azerbaijani people, they mostly involved in trade. That is why this law introduced by Russia in 2007, it affects them very much. And they considered, and it is very interesting how it mentioned in literature. Sometimes you can find this definition, this phrase that trade in Russian markets are controlled by Azerbaijani people. And this gives you hint that there may probably is not talked about in many studies, but it's kind of hint that there are non-formal and like mafiosical control of this. From Georgia, migrant networks are with now it's very popular Greece and domestic work in Greece. Many women leave for Greece to work at homes as babysitters or taking care of elder people. This is men leave, but almost as much as women leave. But there are Georgian migrants in Russia too. Now their number is very little, and also for this all these three countries now Spain in Portugal. Spain more it gets attractive, and many people go to work there in agriculture. Somebody asked me about these stories. Yes, I wanted to tell that since the main discourse is that migration driven by economic reasons, many other motivations are presented to be economically driven. And particularly in family relations, I have had many discussions with migrants, many talks with them that you understand that migration was driven from family issues. Young families wanted independence, and that is why they want to go to live abroad and not in bigger family. But since it is more like more admitted publicly to talk about economic difficulties, they claim this to be driven by economic difficulties. So it is very difficult to understand really what is in that. Main discourses always go in front of and require you to go deeper to overcome these main discourses, which are created by mass media and disseminated by various means.
Alina, thank you very much for such an interesting talk. Like all philologists, I think I'm an amateur anthropologist, of course, so casually traveling across Russia, one of the things that strikes me all the time is how important this gigantic movement of peoples from across this post-Soviet space has been in the last 20 years. You know, all the examples that came to my mind as I was listening to you talk, starting with the Armenian mechanic recently arrived in a small town in Kirovsky Oblast who fixed the car that broke down that I was traveling in. The Ukrainian lumberjacks working in the timber industry in northern Vologda province. Every building site in the big cities seems to be staffed by people who don't speak Russian or don't speak Russian very well. Restaurants where the wait staff are mostly from Central Asia, and also within the Russian Federation itself, the little town that I travel to regularly in northern Volga province, where most of the shopkeepers are from Chechnya. So it's I mean, just to a very casual observer, it's just, to me at least, very, very striking that this mass movement has taken place, and it's very interesting to hear the various bits and pieces of it. But as a philologist, of course, I'm interested in all these stories that people tell, like your earlier questioner. It seems to me, however, that these stories have not filtered very much into high culture yet, unless I'm much mistaken. I can't think of much in the way of high cultural narratives, art films, novels, short stories, at least in Russian, that reflect this fundamental experience. And I wondered if that was the case too for the South Caucasian cultures and languages.
I know one modern novel which was written about a labor migrant, and the author claimed that he himself went to Russia, worked there in the market, and he described very interestingly his story in market, his relations with Azerbaijani and Russian policy, and this is really very interesting novel. There is very interesting book which is the family, the father of the family, confess in the story, and he described their family's migration story to European countries, and this was a exhaustive wandering in different European countries, and applying for asylum, just relying on some gap in the legislation of migration. And it is this book is really very fascinating because he confessed in many frauds and many illegal deeds, how they crossed the border illegally, and he also hinted on institutionalized way of this illegal organization. He mentioned a lawyer in Germany that provided services to migrants and helped them to create their migration story, the way to be eligible to asylum seekers criteria. So there are these stories, and there are also migrants that have their notebooks, and they publish. I used in my dissertation one very interesting diary of a migrant that left for Czechoslovakia. There are also songs about migration. It is very popular topic, and it is very interestingly described. But what I also would like to add, that there are things which are not read in terms of migration, but even in classical novels that are from the beginning of 80s and even the late 90s, you can find these narratives about migration, about journeys in different countries. Yes, you can find them. It is also produced very intensely, and this is also a matter how to read the literature.
Thank you. Really very interesting talk. And I have a question about something that actually relates to Michael asked too, whether there are any connections between the Armenian migrants and the Armenians who are in Russia, Russian Armenians who have been there, and some of them are quite high placed, whether they have any interest in this, like Gabrielianov or Simonyan. I don't know, those people who are very visible, or people who are less visible but occupy some stable and prestigious position in Russian middle class. How do they relate to these migrants?
Actually, there are this gap between the old diaspora and people that are already they are most like Moscovites. They consider to be being Russian people with Armenian origin. There are this gap between a new diaspora and old diaspora, and there are even more gap between that old diaspora already settled in Russia. They just have origin of Armenian origin, but their culture and their everyday life, they are more have Russian style. So gap is even bigger with these labor migrants, because they have different purposes, different style of life, and labor migrants in Russia are very isolated. In many cases, they don't even leave their workplace. And it was very interesting. I saw. I had an opportunity to be in a place where migrants live, and they were like barracks. And this was a really very devastated place in the suburb of Russia. And labor migrants living there, there were not only Armenian, but many more people from Central Asia, from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They were able to leave this working place and the barracks where they live, but the whole territory was it had fences, and they couldn't leave that territory because the owners of this part had agreement with police. Police would not enter this territory, but they were out of it, just on the gate. And if any labor migrant leave the gate, they are stopped and they are asked for documents. So this is the very common lifestyle for labor migrants, and they don't have much opportunity for ties and with the old this classical diaspora.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about sort of the analytical categories you're using, and what the last story sort of got me thinking about what we're considering in terms of who's a labor migrant and who's visible in the statistics that you're using, and who may not be visible in terms of those who are trafficked or those who are in forced labor situations. I'm just curious at all when you're conceptualizing who these labor migrants are you taking into account the sort of resources and data that we have about human trafficking in the South Caucasus, not only to Russia but also to Turkey and East Europe as well?
No, of course not. Like in statistics, you don't have people that cannot be visible and registered, and people that are victims of trafficking that you maybe will have some cases registered in some departments, but even that number does not show the whole situation. So the idea of labor migrant definition is more or less clear. These are the people that leave the country with the aim of work and who work there, but you always will face with this difficulty of definitions, of recording, of numbers, and this work with numbers, it is really very difficult, not only because you don't have much information, but also because the statistics is recorded with different, the ideas are not always unique. You can find in some research number of migrants, and they consider migrants people who lived abroad more than 3 months, while in another study you can find people defining migrant to be one that settled there. Or it is really very complicated. Every researcher just try to find some solution to this. But there are agreements between countries, and the European Union very much instigate this becoming many countries' side of the agreement. They try to share the equal understanding of the term. But now the countries that signed this agreement, they try to collect the data according to these ideas. But even this does not always save the problem. And another thing that make the problem more visible, when these household surveys are done, they approach people that have household members at that time in the country. So we have some number of migrants, but this is the way this is only the people that somehow could be registered. But people that left with families and have no representative to talk about their experience, they are not reflected into these surveys. So yes, there is a big problem both in the numbers and the definitions and criteria. It is a real problem. Yes.
Hi, Alina. Thank you for this very illuminating talk, Alina. I learned a lot. I'm actually from Armenia, but yeah, I'm aware of most of these things, but many of the things were still unfamiliar to me. I have one question. Is there any statistics of showing that the amount of years that people spend like back and forth between Armenia and Russia? And my other question connected to this is that is there any study showing if people are developing any kind of sense of belonging to these both places, because they actually spent half of their year in Russia and half of their year in Armenia, and you also alluded to some people having two families, marrying also in Russia and having children. So where do they belong? I mean, what is the average length of this oscillation between Armenia and Russia, and where do they eventually belong?
Yeah, so we have approximate number of months that these labor migrants stay in Russia. It is considered to be 8 or 9 months. So this is most, and people have very long. Many labor migrants, they start this seasonal labor migration from after the army, after returning back to army until their retirement. So almost in these labor migrants' villages. Years, tens of, many years, men spend the whole their life, the most of their year abroad. And you mentioned these cases when people have two families, and this is a case, and that is yes, spread, a widely spread issue. And there are cases when the wife stay in Armenia with the parents of husband, while husband has another family, and it is not welcomed, but it is tolerated. So. In that cases, migrants have more ties to have this, to feel this belonging. But what is more difficult for me is that this idea of belonging, it is very situational. And I believe that in some cases they will possess them and they will claim themselves to belong to Armenian culture, while in other aspects of their everyday life or in other situations they would probably say that we are from here. And depending at what time and under which situation you give this ask to the person, you will receive different answers. Yeah, this is my belonging is very situational and very personal thing. But there is these ties, and they spend, as you see, most the third part of their life in Russia, and this also makes them indifferent toward the fourth quarter of life living in Armenia. When they return back, most of labor migrants do not try to find a job. They does not look for a job. They does not look for some sustainable stay in Armenia. They are not very interested in political things. They are because they consider this stay some transitional time when they are going back to work in Russia.
Well, this has been very interesting, both the presentation and the discussion, and thank you very much. I had one more thing. When you were showing the difference in attitudes toward the Soviet past and toward Russia between Armenia and Georgia, I couldn't help noticing the languages on the banners at the May Day celebration were in Armenian offstage and Russian, and the placard at the museum was in Georgian and English. And I was wondering to what extent might this carry over into the educational system? What languages are being learned in the schools in these different countries?
English is now very popular in Germany, and young people in Georgia, and young people speak more English than Russian, and most of them that learned Georgian English in the schools, they speak really very fluent and very good English. And in Armenia, you will hardly find school years age students that speak that much fluently English. Russia also is not very well spoken in Armenia. In recent years, Armenians lose this skill. But in all the, both in Georgia and Armenia, both Russia and English are taught at schools. Russia is mandatory for all the schools, and it is the first foreign language, while English, this is a second foreign language, and you have schools that prefer teaching German or French or other languages as a second foreign. And maybe it's more important to mention that after 2003, Saakashvili made many educational reforms, and he encouraged very much education abroad and English. He even invited many big number of English teachers from abroad, native speakers that taught English in Georgian schools, something that is not practiced in Armenia.
Well, I think at this point we've exhausted you and learned a lot, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.